Hello friends, and welcome to a new edition of Conversations with our elected officials. Today we are broadcasting from our studios in the city of Poughkeepsie at 356 Main Street, the studios of ABC Latino Media Network in the city of Poughkeepsie. Poughkeepsie, for those of you that are watching us from afar, is the county seat of Dutchess County, and it has a population as of the last census of about 36,000 people. Poughkeepsie is in the Hudson Valley, midway between New York City and the capital city of Albany, and is part of the New York metropolitan area. Poughkeepsie comes from the native Wappinger language that roughly is Yupuki Ipsing, which means the reed-covered lodge by the little water place, referring to a spring or stream that runs here in the outskirts of the city that feeds the Hudson River. And today, in this new conversation with our elected officials, we have the pleasure of talking with New York State Comptroller Thomas DiNapoli. Tom, a pleasure to have you with us.
Great to be with you. I love your studio, and I got a history lesson about the meaning of the word Poughkeepsie. I didn't know. I figured it was an Indian derivation, but I didn't know that was the story behind it. Wonderful.
And you know a little bit more about Wappinger because we have Wappinger's Falls, one of the villages here. Yeah. And they refer to the native people that were living in this region. Yeah. So yes, it's always interesting to learn our roots.
Yeah. And very important never to forget our roots.
Very good. And by the way, I have the first question that I have. I know that your name is Thomas P. DiNapoli. What's the P stand for?
I get asked that a lot, and it's interesting. It's an Italian last name, so a lot of people think it might be Pasquale, or some people think that maybe I got some Irish in me because they have blue eyes, so they say Patrick. It's actually Peter.
Okay.
Little history behind that. I'm named for my grandfather, who was an immigrant from Italy. His name in Italian was Tommaso Pellegrino DiNapoli. And when he came to America, the name was anglicized, as often happens.
Of course.
And Tommaso Pellegrino became Thomas Peter. So when I was born, my grandfather had already passed away. Not unusual to name, the first grandson in honor of the grandfather, especially if they passed. So I became the anglicized version of Thomas Peter DiNapoli. When I went to the village in Italy when my grandfather was born, I was very proud because some of my friends would say to me, DiNapoli is probably a made-up name. When your family came through Ellis Island, they heard your family was from around Naples, so they probably called him DiNapoli. Well, when I went, the village, small town outside of Benevento, they did my family tree. And it turned out my grandfather was named for his grandfather. So back in the early 1800s, in this little town outside of Benevento, Italy, called Paduli, there was a Tommaso Pellegrino DiNapoli. DiNapoli was our name over there in Italy. It wasn't an Ellis Island name. It was our name, so I'm very proud to have it.
And I heard or I read that in 2013 you received the honorary citizenship in the small town of Paduli.
Exactly right.
Where your grandfather was from.
That's right. That's right. Which was a nice honor. It really was.
Of course.
It was another connection to my roots. And I do think it's so important never to forget where we came from. If we're born here, where our parents or grandparents came from, or if we're born somewhere else. The strength of America is our diversity. And I appreciate, the work that you do here in the Hudson Valley. Because when we talk about diversity in New York State, some people think we're only talking about New York City. Mm-hmm. Well, the reality is diversity is very strong in the Hudson Valley, Long Island, where I come from. And, among the largest growing group is certainly the Hispanic community. We see that nationally, certainly true in New York State. And what I admire about the Hispanic community in New York, the Latino community, there's pride in the language, there's pride in the culture, there's pride in the country of origin, or if you're from the island of Puerto Rico, you're an American citizen to begin with, pride in that island's heritage. That's something that, frankly, because my grandparents were the immigrants, I think for my parents' generation, there was this notion, growing up in the 50s and the 60s, there was some, homogenized view of what an American was. And frankly, when I was growing up, although Italian was spoken by my grandparents and my mother spoke Italian, we weren't encouraged to learn the language or retain it. I don't speak Italian now. I admire the fact that certainly many of the new immigrants, including Hispanic immigrants, they want to keep the Spanish language. Language is such an important part of identity. And to me, celebrating the diversity is not a source of division. It's really a source of unity, because that's how we learn what it is that makes, again, not that homogenized view of what an American is, but in fact, the strength of this country. From many, we become one. And I also believe strongly you need to know and celebrate your own heritage, because if you don't, others are going to define you and define your group. And too often what happens in America, that's done in a negative way, sometimes in the media, certainly sometimes by groups that are trying to tear people down. So I admire those who celebrate culture, and I view the Hispanic community in New York as being very effective in celebrating heritage, celebrating culture, and I admire that. A lesson for all of us to learn from.
That's true, very, very true. And also, it is well known, and I think we just need to look at our own history here in the United States. The United States has always been called a melting pot for the same precise reason.
Yeah.
Because we are the creation of many different cultures, many different peoples, that we all come here with an idea.
Yeah.
And the idea is really to contribute to the growth of this country.
Yeah.
And in the process, growing ourselves.
Well, look, I majored in American history when I went to school. So when you look at the history of this country, Spanish has been spoken in what is today the United States for many generations before there was a United States. I mean, we forget about the settlement of the continent, and certainly the Spanish influence, be it in Florida, Texas, California. Certainly, these were strong Spanish, Hispanic, Latino communities long before there was the United States of America. So what created what we call the United States today, a very important precedent, was the Hispanic community that was here, is here, continues to be here.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of and I think what do you think about it, but the beauty of the Hispanic culture is that it's not homogeneous. It's very diverse. People from the different countries in Central America, Latin America, South America, they all bring a different aspect of the same Hispanic culture. And that is what gives the colorful flavor to life in America.
Yeah.
I mean, from West Side Story to so many other things, from the city of Los Angeles, which had its name way, way before the United States was formed as a country. So yes, that's really very, very interesting. And you are the New York State Comptroller, and you have been New York State Comptroller. You are the 54th Comptroller of the state of New York. And the New York State Comptroller is a state cabinet officer of the state of New York, correct? And the head of the Department of Audit and Control. Tell us a little bit what it means.
Yeah.
What's the function of the state comptroller?
Well, it's a question I've asked a lot.
Because for most people, it sounds like something very ominous, like what it is.
Well, I always say that I have the best job in state government, but the one that nobody knows what quite it is that I do by the title. People know it has something to do with money. And we are one of the constitutional officers for the state, elected by the people. The job that I have in other states is sometimes referred to as the state treasurer or the state auditor. A state like California, for instance, they have a controller and a treasurer, both of whom are elected. In other states, sometimes it's elected, sometimes it's appointed. In New York, our history has been a little different. Basically, what is a state treasurer, a state auditor, and traditional view of a controller is all put together in one office. The key point about the office is the independence, and that's why I'm directly elected by the public. So in that sense, it's not a cabinet position in that I don't, when the governor has his cabinet meetings, I'm not part of that. Because particularly as you point out, one of the core responsibilities is that audit and control responsibility. It means we have to provide independent oversight. We look at how the money is spent. Sometimes people ask me, as controller, could I get a grant for somebody or spend more money on, let's say, a healthcare program or an education program? That's not my responsibility. I don't have a policy or a budget role. I can't direct where the money is going to go in the state or how much is going to be spent. That's the responsibility of the governor and the legislature, and they do that on an annual basis. My job as controller is to make sure the money is spent as intended. So that audit responsibility, we oversee the spending. Again, we don't decide how much, but we make sure it's spent the right way. State agencies, public authorities, local governments as well. So we audit the books of not just New York State government, but also City of Poughkeepsie, Town of Poughkeepsie, Dutchess County, counties, towns, cities, villages, and school districts all across New York State. That's a big part of our responsibility. We approve contracts for the state. We do the payroll for the state. 250,000 state employees every 2 weeks have to be paid. We are a key part of the operations of the state. Approving payments. If you're a business and you're owed money from the state for work you've done, we have to approve that payment. A big responsibility, pension fund. We have over 1 million New Yorkers, state workers, local government workers outside of New York City. We oversee their retirement security through the pension system. Our pension fund is the third largest in the country, over $200 billion right now. And we collect money from employees and from the government employers. Then we invest that money so that we have the money to pay those retirement benefits to the current retirees, have the money set aside for future retirees. It's a big part of our responsibility. When you're managing that much money, and I have a lot of smart people that do it on my behalf, I don't want to make it sound like I'm managing $200 billion by myself. But, pensions are very, it really is a lifeline for people. Many don't have pensions anymore. It's a real issue, the lack of retirement security in our country. But we're fortunate in New York, our public employees have a well-funded pension system. We don't have the crisis that we see in other states like Illinois and Jersey and many other states that have poorly funded pensions. So that responsibility of overseeing the pension is something that many people, that's what they often know about our work. One of the fun things we do is return lost money, our Office of Unclaimed Funds. So I always encourage people, including your viewers, go to our website, just put in New York State Comptroller and click on Unclaimed Funds. See if you might have had an old bank account or a check that wasn't cashed. You could apply right online and get that money back. We have accounts valued at close to $15 billion right now. That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
We want to return to New Yorkers. So that's kind of the fun thing when we can return people's money. So sometimes view us as with the folks coming in to look at the books and do an audit, and that sometimes gets folks a little concerned, but we want to make sure money's being spent the right way, and when we find money being stolen, and we find that, we find people ripping off the system, we work with prosecutors across the state, and we hold people accountable. Just since 2011, our work with prosecutors across the state, from our audits and investigations, resulted in about 150 arrests of elected officials, appointed officials, heads of nonprofits managing money inappropriately. We've gotten back about $50 million in money back to taxpayers, restitution. So we're a very important part of accountability and transparency in government in New York State.
How many people work for your office?
We're up to close to 2,800 right now. Yeah. We were down for a bit, when times were tougher, but we've had some hiring. Many people work in the audit division or in the operations division. A number of people in the retirement system as well. Most of the employees work in the capital region, Albany. I'm always in Albany. I live on Long Island, but I'm always driving past Poughkeepsie and through the Hudson Valley every week when I go to Albany. We obviously have a presence in New York City as well, and then we have regional offices all across the state. So, and that's mostly the home base for our auditors who audit in local government. So Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Glens Falls, Newburgh, Hauppauge, Binghamton. These are the location of our regional office. So we have a presence all across the state.
So if somebody in the community sees that something is not being right in the right way, or believes that some public official is not doing what they should be doing with the monies that they have, can they contact the office of the State Comptroller?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, they could call 518-474-3506, 518-474-3506. That's my office number, and they'll be connected to our investigations unit through that number, or go on the website. Whatever your search engine is, just put in for New York State Comptroller, and you can find on the site if you want to report something by email. And you could even do it the old-fashioned way and send us a letter. Even if it's anonymous, we certainly want to hear if you're aware of something that is just not right. It may be something that we could make a recommendation to be more efficient, but certainly if you're aware of somebody doing something that breaks the law or is stealing taxpayer money, we want to know about it, and we will certainly investigate it. So I do encourage your viewers and listeners to follow up if they have concerns.
Very good. One of the things that truly fascinated me when I was reading about your life is that you started politics very early in life. In fact, when you were 18, okay, and you ran for a position with the school board, and you were there for how many years as the president of the school board?
Yeah, well, you did your research. I had that unique opportunity the very first time I voted when I turned 18. I got to vote for myself. I was running for a seat on my local Board of Education. I went to the Mineola Public Schools on Long Island. And it was actually, I'll date myself, it was the first year that 18-year-olds were allowed to vote, which was 1972. And I had been active in the school community. I was president of the school for the student body. And I'd gone to school board meetings, and I didn't like some of the things that I heard or saw were going on. And I was going to school locally. I went to Hofstra University, also in Nassau County where I live. So some of my friends got together and we said, we want to make a difference in the school community. One of us should run for a seat on the Board of Education. So we were allowed for the first time to participate because they lowered the voting age that year. I got a petition signed. I ended up on the ballot. And I had that, as I said, unique experience. My first vote was for myself. And I won. I served for 10 years. It was 2 terms. We had 5-year terms. And for 2 of those 10 years, I was president of the Board of Education. And it was a real learning experience for me. When you're on a school board, it's not partisan, so it's not Republican or Democrat, but you work for the benefit of the community and for the students and the families. But I got an early experience with making a difference through elective office, and that really encouraged me to get involved in the politics. I got involved in the Democratic Party. My parents were both Republicans, so they weren't too thrilled that I became a Democrat. But that's the party I identified with, and I got active. I helped other candidates. I ended up running unsuccessfully for town office in my home community, and I had the chance in my 30s to run for state assembly, and that's really how I got to Albany, and spent 20 years in the state legislature before I became comptroller. So
you have quite a career and pretty much most of your life in public service.
Yeah, I did spend 10 years in the private sector when, so after school I was going to become a teacher. I didn't end up doing that, but I worked for AT&T for 10 years, doing management work mostly. And I thought that was going to be my career path, but I did always want to do public service. And, after I got that early taste with being on the school board, it really was a wonderful gift and a privilege for me to run, to be elected to the state legislature, and now to serve for the past 10 years as comptroller.
So what do you say to somebody in the community that is watching us right now and they would like to jump into the field, they would like to run for public office, but they are afraid? A lot of people are afraid because they see, well, politics is something that is so full of dirt and so many things, and why should I leave my private practice or my profession and jump in to help others when what I see every day in TV is so bad? So what do you tell somebody that is that?
Well, it's a very important question, and I'm happy to answer it, because the reality is we need more people that have a desire to get involved. You know, it starts with a desire to serve, a willingness to serve, a sense that you could make the community better. And I think you're absolutely right. People feel very put off by, especially these days, the harsh rhetoric in politics. People perceive that you have to have a lot of money to get involved or a lot of connections. You know, the reality is the access to the system is a lot more available than sometimes people realize. I use my own example. I was an 18-year-old kid in high school running for office the first time. When I chose to run for partisan office, my family were Republicans. I didn't have any special connections to the Democratic Party. So I think the first thing you have to do is have a desire to serve and not be afraid to put your name forward. And sometimes not be afraid for disappointment. You know, I didn't win every race that I ran for, but I never gave up. And I found that even when I ran for town office unsuccessfully, you meet new people. You become more familiar with the issues that really are important in the local community. And I think we're living in such a challenging time right now. One of the reasons is that too many people have been turned off. You know, your questions about running for office, some people don't even want to register to vote anymore. Mm-hmm. Well, that is the lifeblood of our democracy. If people don't vote, if people don't step forward to run for office, this system of government is not going to work. And one of the challenges is that we need more competition out there. Competition of ideas, competition of good people on both sides of the aisle. You know, I always say the system works best when good people, Republican, Democrat, whatever party you're in, put themselves forward, and then when the elections are over, they do the government work. Forget about the politics. Keep that, you know, to campaign time. That doesn't happen often enough now. And I think the only way we're going to make our political system work better and more effectively on behalf of people is if more everyday people who haven't been involved in politics would step up and say, I want to be involved. It's not just about running for office. You know, I started by helping other candidates, you know, before I ran for assembly myself. You could be involved in the party committee. There's always opportunities to serve as a committee person. You may not want to run for office, but perhaps you want to work on the staff of an elected official. That could be a very rewarding experience. But I guess my basic message is that it's not as hard or as complicated. But start, you know, not everybody can run for president, you know, first time and get elected, or run for governor. But you know what? You can run for city office, for town office, for village office, for school board. You know, these positions, there's a great deal of accessibility. And don't be afraid to put yourself forward. It's a great experience, win or lose. And I certainly would encourage more who are watching or who are listening, don't be intimidated. The system will work better if more people come forward. We need more competition out there. It's not as difficult as people may think. That number I mentioned earlier, 518-474-3506. If you want advice, call me, because I'll encourage you to get involved, especially young people. You know, I was with your county executive, Mark Molinaro, before we started this discussion. He was elected at 18 also. Exactly. For his village.
For the village of Tivoli.
Yes, but yes. I was the first 18-year-old in the state, so I said, I'm the Jackie Robinson. He came after me. But young people, we need more young people to come forward and to run for office.
And in fact, here in this region, in the Hudson Valley, we have had not just Mark Molinaro, like you mentioned, but also the mayor of the Newport. He was a SUNY Newport student when he ran for office, and he became the mayor, and his name just escapes now.
Yeah.
But
that's another message that anybody, if those of us starting out that young can do it, when you put yourself forward, have a good sense of yourself. Hopefully you've been involved with some community work before you run, and just be open about what your ideas are. Just tell people what you think. You'd be surprised how many people want to hear about new ideas, want to get to know some new people that want to get involved.
So did you have a mentor, somebody that marked before and after in your life in politics?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky. I had many mentors. I mean, certainly when I was first starting, I had two history teachers, social studies teachers, who were they just really always engage me in civics discussions. And when I said I wanted to run for school board, most adults, starting with my parents, thought I was a little crazy to even think about that. But I had some teachers that were very, very encouraging and really were great mentors. And I have to say, my parents, while they probably would have preferred a different career path for me, they were always very supportive. They knew that something that was very important to me. And as I moved through the political process, there were certainly some local Democratic leaders who were sponsors of mine. I remember when I was on the school board, the local Democratic leader reached out and said, I didn't know her, but she said, great, you're on the school board. If you want to be involved in the Democratic Party, we welcome you. And then she became a very big supporter of mine. And then I had the chance to work for a member of the Assembly on his staff. I worked for a congressman for a short time, and they became role models and mentors for me as well. So I didn't have one, but I had many, many mentors who guided me and were always there for me. And that made it a lot easier too. So I've always tried to, I don't know that I've done as well as the mentors did for me, but especially if it's a young person that comes to me looking for guidance, I always try to provide that, give back some of what was given to me. Because having a mentor, having a role model is it's important in any career. It's very important in politics.
Mm-hmm. And a question, did you get to work with Maurice?
Oh, Maurice Hitchie. Well, talk about a mentor and a role model. When I first arrived in Albany in the state legislature, I was elected back in 1986. And in my community on Long Island, there were many issues. And when they ask you which committees you want to serve on. And I said, they give you about 5 committees back then to serve on. And I said, whatever committees you want to assign me to, the 2 I must have are education, my Board of Education days, and the environment, because the environmental issues have been and are very important in my home community. And I got both of those committee assignments, and Maurice Hinchey was the chairman of the Assembly Environmental Conservation Committee. To me, Maurice Hinchey was the role model of what a legislator needs to be. He was passionate with the issues and causes that he championed. He was a trailblazer on environmental issues. I mean, the whole Superfund program that we have in our state to clean up toxic sites that compromise public health, the whole shift in how we handle solid waste management in the state, championing forever wild provisions and more land preservation in our state. You go down the long list of issues. Maurice Hinchey was on the cutting edge of why we have a great environment in New York. And I felt bad when he was running for Congress. Not that I didn't think he'd be great in Congress, but I knew we would lose him from the state assembly. And he went on, what he did in New York is what he did at the national level. Correct. He was a leading environmentalist in Washington, and certainly in the face of challenges. I mean, what we're going through right now with the current administration is the opposite of what Maurice Hinchey's values were. But Maurice was a real fighter, and I had the chance to express to him many times over the years that I wanted to be like him when I was in the Assembly. And I had the opportunity in 2002 where I was named chair of the Environmental Conservation Committee. And I said, I'm now chairing the committee that Maurice Hinchey chaired. And I really strive to be as effective a chairman as Maurice. I don't think I was as good as he was, but he was my role model, and it was a real humbling moment when I knew that I was chairing the same committee that Maurice Hinchey had chaired. It's a great loss. We need more role models like Maurice, and I know the last few years he suffered. It was very tough on him, but what a legacy he's left for all of us, not just in the Hudson Valley and the Southern Tier that he represented in Congress and the Assembly, but wow, if you want to point to a model of what a member of Congress should be, 2 words, Maurice Hinchey.
Yeah, you're totally right. I had the chance to consider myself a friend of Maurice. I got to know him very soon after I arrived here in the Hudson Valley, and while engaged in promoting cultural activities within the region. And Maurice has always been supportive of multiculturalism, the environment. In fact, the reason why we have here all the parks and in New York State and the Gateway and all the things are because of legislation that he promoted.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we were talking about how to start in politics and how sometimes one can have the wrong impression about politics. But you're right, Maurice Hinchey has embodied what the good side of politics is all about, and doing things for the benefit of the people and the state and the country. So this is our small tribute to Maurice.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned his name.
Yeah.
He will always be remembered.
Yeah, and something else that I read about you when you first became New York State Comptroller, you put together a commission and you got to work with former mayor of New York City, Ed Koch.
Yeah.
And Ed Koch always was a personality that personally fascinated me. You could be in agreement with what he was saying or not, but you had to respect that he would always tell you things as he saw them, right? Tell us something about what it was working with Ed Koch.
It was great. You know, you captured his personality very well, because he would tell you if he didn't like what you were saying or what you believed in. You know, I was fortunate there too. You know, when I first became controller, it was very tough. You know, my predecessor had to resign, and there was a vacancy. I was selected through a process appointed by the legislature the first time, and some people were critical of that. And I needed to establish credibility in the office, because the reputation was damaged because my predecessor ran into trouble and had to resign. Ultimately, he spent time in prison, as you know. So, you know, if you don't have credibility as controller, you can't do all those responsibilities we mentioned earlier, in particular with regard to managing the pension fund, which is where there were a lot of problems. And I had met Ed Koch over the years, and I frankly imposed on him. I called him up and I said, Mayor, I need to have a top-to-bottom review of how our office is organized. And you certainly have great experience. He had already been out of office, obviously, by this time. And I asked Mayor Koch and Frank Zarb, who had been head of NASDAQ and was a cabinet official of the Ford administration and a good friend and had served many other public positions for the state. He headed the NASA Finance Authority Board, the Long Island Power Authority, great experience. So one from the private sector, one from the government. I wanted them to chair a committee of experts and smart people to give us guidance on how to reorganize the office. And Ed Koch was very, very helpful. He particularly helped us set up the Office of Inspector General so that we could look internally if there was any problem within our office or corruption, that there'd be a clear office to deal with that, or someone from the outside that had something to report. That was a very important role that he helped us to establish. He gave us a lot of guidance on how to organize things. But the other piece of it is that he gave us instant credibility. Because when people heard that Mayor Koch was having confidence that Tom DiNapoli could manage this job, and Mayor Ed Koch was giving guidance on how to structure the office in a more efficient and effective way, it really helped to put to rest some of the criticisms about my first starting out as controller. And after the commission's work finished, I would speak to Mayor Koch on the phone. We would have lunch now and then. Lunches were very long and very entertaining with Mayor Ed Koch. And one of my fondest memories, I had a very tough race in 2010 when I ran for office the first time. Mayor Koch got up early one morning and stood at a subway station with me in Manhattan. And that was one of the most unique experiences of my political life, to be standing there with Ed Koch, booming with his voice, vote for Tom DiNapoli, come over here and meet him. Of course, everybody wanted to meet Mayor Koch. They didn't want to meet me. But his sense of humor and his joy for the political process. Yes. What a great personality, and what a true New Yorker.
Yes, that's true. And on this note, a question that we make of all the guests in this program, tell us, who is Thomas Peter DiNapoli?
Wow. Well, Thomas Peter DiNapoli is someone who is very proud of his family and the people who raised me. That gave me very strong values. Those values certainly have informed my public service. I'm someone that grew up at a time of great division in our country, the late 60s, early 70s, a lot of divisions, civil rights, the war in Vietnam was a big issue of division, especially for young people. A lot of changes happening in society, environment movement, women's movement, gay rights movement, a lot of movements started then. And I responded to that time of challenge by saying that in the American system, if people step forward, they can help to make a difference. Guided by people like Robert Kennedy and John Kennedy and Martin Luther King, those were the heroes of my youth. I had that dream early on to want to make a difference through public service. And Tom DiNapoli is someone who feels very privileged that the people of New York State have enabled him to be state controller. And every day I wake up, I still say even the bad days are good. People say, well, how could you do politics these days? It's so crazy. I said, well, not every day is perfect, but even the bad days are good. And if we could help move the state forward, do something good for people, even if it's something small, that gives me satisfaction. And that gives me a sense of the value that I bring, to the role that I play. And Tom DiNapoli is an optimist. These are very difficult times. I'm not pleased with a lot of what's happening in Washington right now. It's certainly not what I view, our national leadership should be all about. But I also know this is just a period of time. It's just a phase we're going through. I believe in response to a lot of what we're witnessing that we're not happy about, more people will get involved, whether it's next year, 2018 in the congressional elections, or certainly heading to the next presidential. We're going to put the balance back, and I believe that we will correct the course that we're on right now. And I think that working together, not just Democrats, Republicans too, the promise, the positive, optimistic promise of what the American story is all about is something that we can in fact recapture. And I intend to still be on the front lines of fighting for that. So Tom DiNapoli is ever the optimist, ever hopeful, ever positive, and will continue to look forward to serving the people of our state.
So we have Tom DiNapoli for a while in politics.
I hope so. My contract is up in 2018. I hope it gets renewed by the public, but I'm always going to be involved.
Very good. And on this note, thank you very much.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
A pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
And I'm Enrique Wroblunsky for ABC Latino Media Network, and this has been Conversations with our elected officials. Today, with New York State Comptroller Thomas Peter DiNapoli. Till the next time.